Good morning, members of the council. I want to start by thanking you genuinely for your service to this body. I think it's super unfortunate if it were not to exist in the future. My name is Sean Auckland, and I'm a city resident, researcher, and author of the Concrete Over Canopy report that you received last month. I'm here today representing a broad coalition of public health experts, neighborhood associations, and more than 500 residents that have signed our petition calling for change. We are here to talk about a shared goal, how we can finally achieve the equitable urban forest that this very council first championed 3 years into its existence 2 decades ago. This is not a new conversation. This council has been a leader on this issue for decades. The 2006 Urban Forest Plan, pictured on the left here, was prescient, calling for major tree planting programs, and I quote, targeting underserved neighborhoods in order to achieve greater environmental equity. The 2014 plan reaffirmed the goal to reduce greening inequities. The city's own plans have promised to fix this for almost 20 years, but as the 2014 plan itself admitted and subsequent have admitted as well, past efforts have lacked the adequate support and visibility they needed to succeed. The city, this is not just my analysis. This screenshot from Public Works' own website, live today, is a direct admission of the problem. They state that whiter, wealthier neighborhoods continue to have more street canopy, pictured beside a planting event here in the 1950s, hosted by the mayor. The city has acknowledged the racial and economic disparity that underpins this entire issue, while also acknowledging having no formal plan to repair it. So here's what that inequity looks like today. This table shows the most recent data collected from a partnership between U.S. Forestry and CAL FIRE. They have committed to refresh it every 2 years at their own expense. You can see that neighborhoods like the Tenderloin, south of Market, Bayview, and more have less than a quarter of the city's average tree canopy. This inequity is not random, it is structural. This chart proves a direct mathematical link. The higher a community's environmental justice burden, the lower its tree canopy. The population-weighted correlation is a significant 0.49. This is a green gap that our city has failed to close. And I want to emphasize that environmental justice scores do incorporate Department of Public Health's areas of vulnerability index that takes into account wealth and persons of color. So that is a part of this correlation. This is not just an aesthetic issue. It is a public health crisis that is being ignored. Our research shows a significant negative correlation between tree canopy and cancer-causing PM 2.5 air pollution. In your packets, you will find a letter sent just days ago from the University of California Systems Center for Climate Health and Equity to Mayor Lurie, attesting that this exacerbates existing health disparities and communicated to him and this council the urgent need to address disparities in access to trees. Their research shows that trees are life-saving infrastructure. Unlike in 2014, the city is now legally required to act. The general plan's environmental justice framework is not a suggestion. It is a legally binding mandate passed in 2023 requiring, and I quote, subsequent efforts should ensure that the EJCs are prioritized for specific policies and resources that can help redress historical injustices and meaningfully improve economic, health, and other outcomes. It also requires the development of neighborhood-specific targets for tree canopy cover. Unfortunately, no such canopy targets exist. The city is not following its own law. An analysis of 400 discretionary plantings since that framework was passed, and by discretionary, we have excluded any plantings that are required by law or development from the street tree list, shows zero correlation with environmental justice scores. We are planting randomly with regard to environmental burden. I want to emphasize I do not believe is a failure of any one department or a failure of staff. It is a failure of systems within San Francisco. We are not prioritizing need. And worse than a lack of progress, we are 8 years into a policy signed by now imprisoned former director Mohammed Nuru, Public Works Order 187246, that actively reverses the city's goals. This single policy guarantees the future loss of 20% of Bernal Heights canopy, 24% of SoMas, pictured here, trees in red, 19% in Glen Park, 10% in Hayes Valley, and I could go on. We have engaged with Public Works on the ground, and I want to emphasize we appreciate their willingness to begin a pilot program to replant 2 of the 55 affected alleys in SoMa. But this does lead to the core of the problem. Just this week, DPW offered this response to Glen Park News, that the response is not to change the policy, it is to offer individual exceptions. This is a political shortcut, it is not a real policy, and as a resident of SoMa recently said at a neighborhood meeting, an exception-based system is inherently inequitable, benefiting only those with the time, influence, and political power to fight City Hall. What we need is a real policy amendment that works for all residents without having to fight for it or write 14-page reports. This systemic failure is also reflected in our funding choices. The city's implementation of a lauded $12 million federal grant, seen here on the left as the red and blue funded tracks, excluded numerous designated environmental justice census tracts from funding. On the right, you can see in red, there are many census tracts that were denied funding despite having demonstrably less canopy and higher environmental burden than those that were funded. And that $12 million is being funded to blue tracts, but many of which do not qualify under the city's own methodology as having high need. This is another example of a system failing to prioritize the communities it not only is legally required to, but says a whole lot about saying they do. We are not alone. A broad and growing citywide coalition has come together to demand a real solution, from public health experts to the 26 associations listed on the left, represented by the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, to neighborhood groups here seen from all across the city. We are united, and we are asking you to help us implement the solution that the city has needed for 20 years. Now, I know that this council's future is uncertain, but I respect the work you do, and the positions you hold are very important. This is your opportunity, while you still exist, to leave a powerful, lasting legacy. I have beside me a draft resolution that builds on your own 2006 findings and your own 2014 findings and the city's new legal mandates. I urge you to pass it in your next meeting. Specifically, we ask that this recommend that the Director of Public Works amend the Public Works Order, call on the Mayor and the Board of Supervisors to pass an ordinance requiring tree equity, and state that this ordinance must be transparent, data-driven, with neighborhood targets and dedicated funding. Please use your power as this city's forestry experts to put this on the official record and set the city on the right path. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean, for that very persuasive presentation. I know how much effort it takes to put something like this together. As a general comment, this is one of those situations where what we all want to do, which is increase canopy, especially in places that have low canopy, runs up against a whole set of issues. Sometimes they are policy, and we'll discuss that in a second. Sometimes they are physical, in other words, space for trees or lack of space. Sometimes they're a combination of the two. So if, for example, a federal policy says that you cannot apply the funds to expand tree basins or remove concrete, then that steers those funds into places that don't need to have concrete removed or basins enlarged. And the result is these sorts of situations where you say, why did you apply that funding over there? And the answer is, well, because we didn't have a choice. And I'm by the way, I'm not disagreeing with the idea that where we lack canopy, we need to apply extra effort to ensure that we have canopy. Otherwise, nothing changes. In fact, things get worse. What I am saying is that because of the way urban forestry is funded, and because of the way urban forestry policies are developed at multiple levels that then affect that funding, frequently what ends up happening is sort of head scratching. And so, for example, if there is an environmental justice map that drives the funding, and that environmental justice map excludes South of the Market area at the time when the funding is allocated, that then drives where the funding goes, even though, let's say, the next iteration of the map includes South of the Market areas in their priority, right? So this is all a long way of saying the complexities often end up driving us towards outcomes that are not as positive as we'd like. Right? So let me open it up to the.
Can I quickly respond to that?
Please.
I appreciate that. I think there's a real big disconnect from how this is discussed in City Hall versus our experience in our neighborhood.
Okay.
I really admire the LA Urban Forest Equity Collective on how they approach this. They divide planting sites into 3 tiers. Tier 1, readily plantable. Tier 2 requires new concrete cuts. Tier 3 requires structural alterations like you're describing. Tier 1 alone, in the last 3 weeks, we've documented 136 empty wells in SoMa. It's inexcusable. We have the planting spaces that are tier 1. What I hear instead from city staff is a concern of survivability. That's not in the EJ framework. Survivability is itself an additional form of bias. When the city treats the Tenderloin and South of Market as a place for the containment zone of the city's ills and says, well, you can't actually have nice things, that's what we get, are readily plantable spaces and responses that those don't exist. And I just want to show one more slide.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what methodology you look at. You could look at any federal framework like CGEST or US Forestry. You can look at state frameworks like Cal EPA or Cal Enviros Green 4.0. You could look at our own city tools like the High Injury Network for Traffic. We know trees have a calming effect. Areas of vulnerability, which include race and household income, air pollution. You can look at any methodology, and SoMa is among the greatest in need individually, let alone the intersectional need. But somehow we keep getting excluded from grants for reasons of planting or survivability. In my view, it reflects neglect and bias.
All right, thank you. I will simply add that I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way. I think what we need to look at the end of the day are the outcomes and impacts. And if those are bad or absent, we need to figure out ways to change it. I am suggesting, however, that urban forestry is a long-term endeavor. And I remember a time not so long ago where the entire city and county of San Francisco, so aside from like 2 tiny pockets, was excluded from the state's grants. That wasn't that long ago. And the state said, nope, you are not eligible. So, and again, that we're living with legacies of all those things. As you pointed out, we are living with all kinds of legacies. Usually we don't talk about the good ones, we talk about the bad ones. So you're right, it's a systemic problem. And let's see what we can do to make changes to move us in the positive direction. Thank you for pointing out where we are, because it's not a good place. I agree. Comments from members of the council or from Jesus? Sorry, I did. Yeah. Jesus did have his hand up, and Jesus did prepare a very nice summary, which is the 3rd tab in your packets. Yes, the last one. I especially appreciate the tabs, right? Like of where we are with the
So just and ahead, I just wanted to note that I prepared these notes just as a review of the Concrete Over Canopy document. I intend them in no way to be combative. I think we all are here with the goals of making sure that we have a equitably distributed urban forestry canopy. That is my personal life goal. I've dedicated the last 10 years of my career to that specifically. It was more just to provide notes for a productive discussion here at the council. I wanted to note that I reviewed both the original posting of the Justice, Jobs, and Trees, or actually the USDA Forest Service, Urban Community Forestry, Inflation Reduction Act, Notice of Funding and Opportunity. That document both listed the construction capital improvements, which are necessary throughout SoMa West to plant more trees, specifically with the discussion of survivability. What that was specifically in that document, not an eligible cost, and then an eligible use of that funding, and that document also did place 30% of the entire proposal score on the alignment with Justice 40, which used the CGEST tool, V1. V1 did not include SoMa West. V2, which was released in 2024, did include SoMa West, but that is well after even the award of the grant. And I only note that just so it's clear that this grant was not intentionally in any way not excluding SoMa West.
Sure. Do you know why the Bayview, which were designated as disadvantaged communities in the V1 version of that, were also excluded from the planting? There are about, I think, 5 tracts in the Bayview that were excluded.
Then I'm not sure. No.
Okay.
That's the only comment I wanted to make for now. I'll add comments as relevant to the discussion, since none of the council members have had time to look at my notes in advance of this meeting, because I wasn't able to post them to the public website or share them with the public. I didn't want this to be a situation where I was violating any city policy. So if needed, I'll comment with any of my further notes.
And just for both Sean and the members of the public, the council is very much aware that we are not planting enough trees citywide. Part of it, and this is reflected in the notes that Jesus provided, was that the Department of Public Works used the worst first policy when the funding for street trees became available. That resulted in a large slug of trees being removed. That rate of removal is abating, but again, legacy of over 50 years of no funding that we're catching up with. So I think, and I will stop talking and allow other council members to have a say, but what I'm wondering is what actions or what policy adjustments would make a visible difference in these neighborhoods in the short term? So without engaging in a sort of giant policy discussion or policy change, which frankly sometimes has an effect and often doesn't. Again, I've been in the urban forestry world long enough to see cities that have all kinds of policies that have very low canopy numbers. I'm sort of thinking, okay, looking at these neighborhoods, what would make a visible difference in a reasonably short time so that it's actually visible to regular humans?
I
anybody has
comment before we
Please.
delve into the. So there are two. I think. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is amazing research, and thank you for framing it in a way that shows the inequities in the city. As Chair Lacan said, we are aware of the inequity, obviously, and some of us are working in neighborhoods. But I would like to frame the conversation. So the conversation is very broad. So obviously, we could spend a week talking about why we're here. And I always like deliverables of the conversation. So I think your ask, if you can pull it up again, the ask, the presenter asked the council with. I think in order to make progress on this, it would be nice to leave the room at least with some kind of general action for next time we talk again. And I think the conversation can be divided. I mean, your conversation has a lot of topics, and I think the main topics are, one is the distribution of funding, which is one topic, and then there is also the requirements that for tree planting, that actually it's a little bit more in the weeds of when you design a street or when you manage a street or retrofit a street in San Francisco. So there are two different kind of topics, and I think we should clearly divide them, because otherwise it's going to get meshed up in one big conversation that doesn't have any focus. So I would like to talk about the Director of Public Works Amendment request. Obviously, this is the elephant in the room. It's a big request. It's something that's used by Public Works to design streets and alleyways. I'm part of the urban design team, or the street design advisory team in San Francisco. So every time there is a new development coming in the city, I'm part of the team that reviews these designs. And we have been struggling in defining alleyways as places that can have trees. So I don't know if today is the day to go into the depths of this problem, but I want to put in writing that, as a urban designer planning department, we've been always trying to resolve this issue, that the request of having the width of the sidewalk, treating alleys as places with sidewalks, therefore with all the needs of a sidewalk, that it's usually installed in a larger street width. So this is a problem, because I don't want to give the illusion to anyone that if we don't resolve this problem, trees won't be planted in the alleyways. There is no way, because every time we review a design, we always told, no, you have to have a curb because of ADA, and you need to have this width. So we can do the math, right? We can't plant trees if we don't have that width. I mean, you can. The only way to add width is to set back the buildings that are requested. And I mean, I don't think it's fair on the development to set back ask buildings to be set back and cut units.
Can I jump in on that? Respect the planning roles, the planning team's role. And just to be clear, we would never compromise on having an ADA space of 48 inches required. I just want to add, we have been working with David and his team to survey the 2 blocks that I mentioned in my presentation. I think they evaluated 18 or 19 planting sites and deemed at least 13, maybe 14 plantable within existing guidelines. So these were previously banned outright by Public Works Order, but through a reevaluation by David and his urban forestry team, they have identified that at least 13 sites are plantable. And so what my request on that, and it may involve and really welcome the planning department's involvement, is that is not an exception for the 2 blocks on which the noisiest squeaky wheel lives, but results in a structural policy change that benefits Bernal Heights.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Sorry, I wasn't finishing with my speech. I was saying that this is an issue. I just want to point to one of the issues why this is not happening, because otherwise we are qualitatively discussing. This is a design requirement that allows or not to plant trees. So the general plan and all the area plans of San Francisco call for green alleyways. Okay, so the Market Ontario plans call for green alley, the Mission Area Plan calls for green alley, and this is one of the city mandates, to green alleyways and treat them as actually public spaces and not back alleys for trash and truck deliveries. Yeah. And I think this is an opportunity, looking at your maps of inequity, to really reconsider the way we deliver these designs on alleyways. And so we can, answering your question, the short term is doing what has been done, going back, looking at all the tree pits, look at the opportunity for planting and planting them. But that's a very reactive way of doing things. I mean, we can, repair that, but then there is also, how do we move forward in the future? And the future is rethinking about these alleyways in a different way. And one of the ways, unfortunately, reconsider all the design standard that we put on the burden that we put on these alleyways to perform. And then that burden doesn't allow the tree planting or greening. So I just put it out there. This is a technical, maybe it sounds technical, but that's in the heart of the issue. There are other issues of funding distribution, but I don't have an overall perspective on that, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I'm just putting out there that the DPW order review will require, obviously, an interagency discussion that we can't have today. But I want to put out there that that's one of the ways to design alleyways, like flat without curb, for example. It's a way of designing them.
Yeah, we would most welcome that, and maybe some members of this council as well. I know that I think Hayes Valley is here in the room, and Hayes Valley would be a most welcome partner in that process as well.
Thank you.
I think we need to know, though, what the rationale behind PWO 187246 was in terms.
Happy to answer.
Yeah, like, can you describe why it was drafted the way it was? What's the other side of the argument, I guess, here in terms of, yeah, what's the rationale? Like, is it defensible or does it need to be revised? I mean, before we can sort of just have that discussion, I think we need to understand that perspective.
May I have the floor, Igor?
You have the floor.
Hi, if you haven't met me yet, my name is David Moore. I'm the superintendent for the Bureau of Urban Forestry. Nice to see some familiar faces in the room. Our team, our Bureau of about 120 employees, is responsible for planting and maintenance of street trees, as well as maintenance of the sidewalks around them and the landscapes in our public right-of-way. I want to start by saying thank you, Sean, for all of the work you've put into this presentation, for your enthusiasm, and for all the people who came out. This is really good turnout for one of our meetings. As Igor said, we are in jeopardy, so we need more people to come to these meetings and be engaged. And we want to be on the same side of the problem of trying to address issues that affect us, as well as, collaborate on solutions to them. And through your efforts, Sean, I've gotten to meet a lot of the people that you are working with, some of whom are in the room today. I got to meet Alex from SoMa West, and Stu and Leah, and so there's a lot of great that has come out of your efforts already, and I want to say thank you for that again. As a certified arborist and a superintendent of San Francisco Public Works, we want to just say, as from our bureau standpoint, that demand for trees is a good thing. We welcome the focus on greening San Francisco's least leafy neighborhoods, and this aligns directly with our mission and our street tree planting methodology and our urban forest plan, which is already cited. That urban forest plan was made in collaboration with this council. This council was the vehicle by which it launched and gained traction as public policy. And we haven't done it alone, with many partners, including Friends of the Urban Forest and community members. And one of those goals is to plant every available tree planting space by the year 2040, which is no small task. We already have 125,000 to take care of, and we want to add about 30,000 more. But to get back, I want to speak, in response and have the opportunity to kind of give a holistic response, which can be part of the conversation. But since this seems to be directly most at my bureau in Public Works, I just want to have the opportunity to state our perspective. And I'll start with your question, Spencer, is what's the rationale for having a minimum tree bed size? And as a certified arborist, who there's several in the room who are, or some of us have a bachelor's of science, a master's, or a PhD, it might be common knowledge to the people in the trade, but maybe not to the public. But I printed out a peer-reviewed research article written by one of my mentors from Cornell, Dr. Nina Bassick, who kind of like wrote the book on street tree best management practices in New York State. And this is not the right document. It's entitled Specifying Soil Volumes to Meet the Water Needs of Mature Urban Street Trees and Tree Containers, written in 1991. And it cites at least 8 different studies going back to 1980 of practitioners trying to figure out how to get trees to grow and measuring their size and potential size at maturity in comparison to the amount of soil volume that they have. And this has been something that we've been trying to troubleshoot for at least 45 years. How can we get trees to grow in these little areas? And this led to Nina eventually, or Dr. Bassick, eventually coming to technical innovation of what's called structural soil, which is re-engineering the area around the tree that's underneath sidewalk with a type of medium that tree roots can grow under without heaving the sidewalk. And if you look up Cornell University structural soil, you'll learn all about it. So there are technical solutions to this. The thing is, it costs about 10 times more to do this type of effort, on top, because you're re-engineering not just the tree bed, but the whole area around it. But the science behind this issue, and the intention of the director's order is to not plant trees where we've seen for decades that they're doomed to fail because there's not enough soil volume. There's ways to calculate and forecast how much soil volume is necessary to establish a certain amount of tree canopy. Because either the sidewalk's going to win or the tree's going to win. The sidewalk and the surrounding area can just kill the tree because not only does the tree need structure through its roots, but it also needs the capacity to bring up water. So you can't have a tree that's big on top without straws to access soil moisture. And if there's not enough of those, then the tree just never reaches like the vision that we have. So one thing that hasn't been really included in this dialogue is just the research that backs up the director's order. And the director's order, which I have a copy of, and you can look it up. I just wanted to dispel, which I think it might be an embellishment of its intention. I've heard the word banned used before. Nowhere in the policies does it say that trees are banned anywhere, under any condition. The policy actually states explicitly that in the context of making sure that there's enough space for trees to grow without heaving sidewalks, that the minimum basin size should be at least 3 feet wide. That means if there's a 6-inch curb and 3 feet of tree bed, you'd still have 4 feet of sidewalk for ADA, which is, the San Francisco's minimum for wheelchair access. But except, our streets are not cookie cutter. That's not graph paper. It's not an Excel sheet. Things are not completely standardized. So there are, exceptions mean that professionals who are practitioners in the field and have the expertise to assess available root volume and available growing space have the discretion to modify this on a case-by-case basis. I would argue that the alleyways themselves are an exception to a typical street. So we are in an exceptional situation. And, if we were to say, all other details, in consideration, let's just strike this order and say there's no standards for, street tree minimum width. Let's make it sure that, there's no sort of discouragement of planting in narrow areas. That whether we do that or not, it doesn't mean that nature is going to let the trees, overcome having a limited amount of soil volume. So I would say that the intention of the policy is to acknowledge the facts, whether that's peer-reviewed research or it's anecdotal evidence that trees just don't live to maturity when they have a limited amount of soil volume. It's a game of inches. A 2 by 3 or a 3 by 5 is a dramatically amount, in terms of feet, a dramatically difference of soil volume. And I think that we've been mischaracterized unfairly in a couple situations where it says we ban trees in a narrow area. Well, I don't see the citation of the actual order, which I'm holding in my hand, but if I could read page 10 of it out loud, it's part of a greater clause called Guidelines for New Tree Basin Construction and Dimensions. In B, placement of sidewalk, part 1, a street tree should be planted in the center of the tree basin. In no case may new street trees result in an unobstructed sidewalk width of less than 4 feet. Trees should be placed in alignment with existing trees in locations where minimum obstructed sidewalk width will not be impacted. Trees should be set back from the curb. Alignment should be approved by Public Works. Part 2, no street tree planting will be allowed in sidewalks with a width less than 7 foot 6 inches, including the curb. Exceptions may be granted on a case-by-case basis as approved by Public Works. And then it continues and it shows many, many other ways, but it's part of a policy document that sets trees back from traffic intersections and away from other infrastructure because it's very expensive to plant something that then grows into something else, like a stop sign, or when we went on we are planting trees in this neighborhood and they do meet our guidelines and we are working with many of the folks in this room. But there's more to it than just the tree bed width. Some of those things include there's other buried utilities. So to say that every tree, we were going to have all these trees, but they could never be planted. And the only reason is the sidewalk width. There's actually many other factors that could be involved. It could be proximity to a driveway. It could be proximity to an overhead fire escape. It could be a proximity to other trees. So I just don't want to too narrowly focus on this issue. Like, it's part of a much bigger process that our staff handle. But I will say that it's so helpful to know that people want trees, because that's like one of the most important factors for us to determine where to plant. Because if we plant trees where there's no demand or people don't want it, then oftentimes they're victims of vandalism or neglect. And we have sort of you can see that more affluent neighborhoods have more trees, and there's many different equity reasons that we understand the back history of, and going back to redlining and other, unfair practices going back almost 100 years. But also, people with their basic needs met tend to be more focused on trees. So we get more demand for those trees. So it's kind of like a self-propelling inequity. So knowing that people can have people who want to have trees in their neighborhood helps us narrow in, like, great, let's go for it. We have opportunities. We have targets to meet. And we also have a $12 million IRA grant that is focused on our disadvantaged census tracts, including Bayview, Hunters Point, the Tenderloin, Civic Center, and the Mission District. And we actually, with our partners, Friends of the Urban Forest and Clean City, we're about to initiate $7 million of tree planting and tree watering in our disadvantaged communities, which includes SoMa. In addition to that, we're brainstorming, ways to use restitution funds that came through people who removed trees as part of a construction project. And, we're going to pilot, we're meeting about piloting a community initiative that may include the community benefits district, similar to how Mission Verde, was successful in the mission. So I just don't want to mischaracterize Public Works as not focusing on equity. I think it has to do much more with how Igor characterized it as funding comes for specific areas, and we have to create a mosaic of projects that we get to see it through many lenses, but also see through the lens of where can we get the funding for, because it's either that or we don't have any. Because tree planting, though it's a goal of the urban forest plan, it doesn't come from Prop E in the same way that our tree maintenance funds come through. So that's sort of where I wanted to start with, and just also say that we want to partner and we want to be part of a productive conversation of developing these solutions. But we just want to make sure that we're talking about facts, and we're considering all the science that goes into these policies and looking at them comprehensively.
I have a follow-up question.
Can I jump in?
I have a follow-up question for this technical discussion. You go ahead and then
Thank you. One thing I thought was remarkable, Sean, about your presentation is that in terms of inequity, you weren't just talking about the IRA, you were talking about historically. And so it's not, I understand that we are talking about the application of the IRA in one instance. And I think what's important for all of us to remember is that his presentation didn't start with that. It went back to 2 decades. And David, thank you for pointing out that policy the director's order does have an exception. I will say that I've attended probably every single tree removal hearing since 2017, and I've never seen that applied. So it's great that it does. And I think it would be really great too if the department, when it's looking at tree removals on these types of streets, would automatically go to that. Can we examine this exception? Because what I have heard is that this is just how we do it. So, we're really living in a time that demands that we do things differently, that we think about things differently, that we look at having some creative solutions, because clearly what we're doing isn't working. Our canopy is not getting bigger, it's getting smaller. And to that end, Sean, I have a question for you. You talk about the tree equity, a proposed tree equity ordinance. I'm an attorney. I also am a disability access specialist through the Division of the State Architect. I am curious if you could just sort of give us some loose contours of what you think a tree equity ordinance would look like. I find the law to be a very powerful tool. That's why I am a lawyer, and I believe that if it's not in the law, it's probably not going to happen. So if you just very briefly, because I know we're running really long on time here, I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, first, I just want to state for the record that I requested formally an exception to this policy in 2021. I spoke with Susan Newberry from DPW. I have those emails I furnished them to DPW. I was denied such an exception. And then I wrote this very long report and I somehow received such an exception. So I do not believe it's based on technical basis.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Is this about the specific tree in front of your property, Sean?
No, I said my street in the request. Yeah, it was for the 11 wells on my street. That was the request. To answer a council member's question, because in practice we do not, I want to define the difference between equitable and equal. When you have a canopy that is distributed as inequitably as our current canopy, when you plant equal, which is the policy that I have heard, you perpetuate that inequity unintentionally. So I'm not questioning anybody's intentions here. I actually know that when we lost when there were 1,000 tree failures in 2023, that your own council presented and said, we need a dedicated funding from the mayor, and that was denied. So I'm not questioning the intentions. I am, however, concerned by the outcomes. And so I do believe that legal action would be necessary. I want to share that Los Angeles, Sacramento, and Oakland all have formal equity plans. San Francisco is the only large city without one. And so we are proposing to the supervisors and to the mayor, which I shared with the mayor just a couple of days ago, a tree equity ordinance. And I have asked you to support it in the resolution, so I will share briefly what it is. It looks at 2022 CAL FIRE data on canopy and ranks tracks from 1 to, I believe, 247 is how many tracks we have on need, number 1 being the lowest canopy. And then it also rates EJ scores, so that the highest scores of near 21 to 30 are ranked also 1 to 247, and then it just adds them like a golf game. So 1 plus 1 equals 2, and the sum of equally weighted, 50% and 50% weighted of existing canopy inequity, or existing canopy, period, absolute, and EJ burden determine your need score. And then those are split into terciles of high, medium, and low need. It's that simple. And then it prohibits the approval of large-scale tree planting programs in any tract that is considered low need, and request prioritization of high need. And so that has been, we're talking to the Board of Supervisors and to the mayor, and that's what we would propose as a much fairer process. But again, I want to leave open to that. I think that community input and expert opinion is important. And I have said that whatever methodology is used, it should just be transparent, defensible, data-driven, and to take into account the needs of the community. And it's not on me to choose that. And so I'm very open to what that looks like. I am confident, however, that the places that I live and the places that the groups that have signed on to as coalition partners would be prioritized no matter the methodology, given the obvious need that I see. Thank you. I want to yield my time, and so I'm going to just end my portion. You all feel free to discuss, and then when we get to public comment, I do think it's important that community members are heard on this topic.
Hi, thank you, Sean, for your presentation and for everyone for being here. I'm Caroline Scanlon. I'm the tree planting program manager at Friends of the Urban Forest, and we are a major partner with the Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I just wanted to share some of our planting data from the past 2 fiscal years. And Sean, I totally agree with you that a uniform framework that we can all agree on would be a great and important next step. There are lots of different tools that different funding entities and different bodies within the city and different organizations use to determine priority areas. One of the primary tools that we've used at Friends of the Urban Forest is the California Climate Investments Priority Populations Mapping Tool, which is a tool that was required by one of our major funders, the CAL FIRE. for some of our major grants. And I just want to share that in the past 2 fiscal years, so fiscal year 2024 and 2025, we planted just about 3,000 trees as an organization. And I can break down by what they call disadvantaged community status, where all of those trees were going. So I know that I think that you found a lot of your data on the Bureau of Urban Forestry website. Not all of the trees that we've planted, I think, have made their way on there. That's not a process that we have control over. But 15% of the 3,000 trees that we planted were in designated disadvantaged community zones. 12% were in low-income zones within half a mile of disadvantaged communities. 54% were in low-income communities, and then 20% didn't fall into any of the disadvantaged community zones. So as an organization, we really believe strongly in following an equity framework, and we have followed these particular guidelines of this tool to guide our planting. I think that there is an opportunity to really come together and agree on a data-driven framework across all of the agencies that plant trees. But I do want to slightly correct the record to say that planting has been totally random, because it has not been, at least from our organization's perspective. And yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say there. I have lots of thoughts on other aspects of the of your paper, but I know there are lots of people that want to give comment.
Yeah, so from my perspective, this is not really my area of expertise, but it's like we have a general rule here, and then there's an exception clause in the rule. But the exception clause will only be pursued if there's an advocate on the other side asking for that exception to be considered. So for me, the issue here comes down to an issue of trying to balance out the advocacy part. Is there a way for, in places where, I think as the presentation noted, folks might not be as available to attend public meetings and to, to sort of have the sort of the energy or the ability to advocate appropriately for that exception to be pursued. Is there a way to kind of like change that dynamic? Have someone who actually evaluates these sorts of things, and this might come down to some sort of like community advocacy arrangement where we do have someone to fill that gap. But I also heard something interesting from David note in passing here, which I think sounds important, which is that in areas where there aren't people coming out saying they want trees on that block, they're more likely to get vandalized or less likely to survive. And that seems to be a disconnect that's really important to address here. Like, I mean, if there aren't people from that street saying, hey, we want that exception to be invoked, the tree actually might not get treated very well by the neighborhood. So, I mean, I just present that as like a relative outsider's sort of perspective on this puzzle here. Like, is there a way to kind of, get an advocate for that particular area?
Go ahead, and I'll go after you.
So I think I heard a few things. I think having a rule that needs to have exceptions to plant trees is a very inefficient way of conducting the tree planting strategy in San Francisco. I think 7.6 it cannot be applied to the whole city. So we heard that, and we have entire areas of SoMa that they cannot allow for a 7.6 sidewalk with a tree. So we know that. We have a map looking at it. So that's urban design structure of the city. We can change that. We also heard that in the Tenderloin, and I am the public space lead in the Tenderloin, so I work with all the communities there. The latest tree planting in the Tenderloin, most streets were not plantable because of sub-basement conditions. Okay, so yes, we went there, we tried plant the Tenderloin, I was there too, and we could not plant it. So this is already 2 case studies that involve 2 EJ communities that cannot do anything against, it's their word against the other rule. Those 2 communities cannot be planted. So following what Member Clip said, I think it's time to step back and be a little bit more creative. It's more work for the city to do that. It's asking us to think outside the box. We cannot go around applying only one rule for any street in the city because that's not going to work. So we know that. We know that because we have experts at the table, and one of those that is, I've been designing streets for 25 years, and I can tell you the 7.6 does not apply to the whole city. So either we want to do something about it or we don't. And so I think there are also issues of grants and all that. So I just want to point out that if we want to work on it, I think that's a way of taking approach to planting, asking the community to advocate individually for every street. I think it perpetuates inequity because the communities I work with, they don't have capacity. They don't. I mean, these are people that truly don't have capacity to think about trees outside their, yet they are the victims of not having green canopy in their neighborhood. So I think it would be good to, step back, have other conversations that cannot be resolved here, obviously, immediately. But I think I just want to put it out there because it's very easy to say, well, we have a rule and we apply it, but it's not going to work everywhere. So that's in my experience. Go ahead.
I want to add a few notes just based on my review again. I think so I don't lose track of everything. Sean, previously you asked why those tracks in the Bayview were left out, so I just want to touch on that. Just from a quick overview of the publicly available original application to the IRA grant, all of the areas covered in San Francisco by the CGES tool were requested in that grant. I'm not privy to the conversations that happened between then and the award, but it seems from the maps included in the grant application that it turned into a combination of heat vulnerability and low canopy. That's it, just that note, just to answer. As a follow-up, I did a review of the cities mentioned in the Concrete Over Canopy document to the most updated tree planting requirements that I could find. I'm in no way am I kind of advocating that those policies are correct or should be adopted in this situation, but based on New York City, Los Angeles, Portland, and Boston, the ones there, it's with the exception of Boston, San Francisco has San Francisco's policy actually results in the most narrow sidewalk requirement. New York policy results into about 9.5 feet, Los Angeles about 13.5 feet, and Portland at about 13 feet. Boston specifically states no trees planted in sidewalk widths less than 6.5 feet, but also has a standard basin size of 4x6. So I'm not sure how that works. That seems impossible. And all of the city policies also include a case-by-case basis exception. No note on how the case-by-case exceptions work. That's just the note that I wanted to add here. In the packets, I also included a very quick GIS check of my own, first mapping all of the sidewalks in SoMa West that are mapped as being more narrow than 7.5 feet. The 4 feet and above are marked in blue, and 4 feet or less marked in that yellow orange. I only looked at the trees that are on the available data on Data SF. And I checked that data again yesterday in advance of this meeting, just to make sure I was presenting the most updated version that I could. There are about 806 trees on those narrow sidewalks. But I also wanted to note that about 225 of them have been planted since 2014. I didn't look further back than that, but I thought that was an interesting note that trees have, in fact, not like obviously not enough to replant every basin, but there have been at least 225 trees planted since the 2014 Urban Forest Plan. And I think to Carol's note, and managing a database of that many points on a GIS system is incredibly difficult. It's hard for my computer to even load all of the points. So this is no like dig on DPW, but I don't, as Karen mentioned, I don't think it reflects all of the trees planted over the last however many years. I just from my own experience with DPW's discretionary planting, both as a staff for Friendly Urban Forest and now a staff for the Environment Department. The discretionary plantings of DPW that I am aware of, very specifically their Arbor Day plantings, those have been all focused since 2023 in D5 and D6. And then Arbor Day 2022 was in Bayview. And I don't believe, like including trees that I planted on those days, I try to keep track. I don't think all of those are included in that map. So not necessarily in defense, but just as a note that maybe the street tree map is not adequate for the analysis of the distribution of tree planting over time. This council tries to track street tree planting year over year, and we, as of a few meetings ago, have also intend to more robustly track where and what is planted throughout the city, since it is the most complete data set that we, as a city family, are able to put together. And then just one final note also, I don't want to go too long. I want to add that, like, very specifically, I try to engage with some of our larger funders as much as possible, trying to seek funding for the city. Currently, as just as part of my role, for Friends of the Urban Forest, who receives a good amount of, or has received a good amount of CAL FIRE funding in the past. I think maybe the city has received CAL FIRE funding to plant trees as well. From my conversations with them, and we can invite Tanner. Tanner is our representative. He's come and presented with us before. He's also a San Franciscan that cares about our trees and their equitable distribution. But CAL FIRE has already been making an exception to their minimum basin size for their funding, which was given to us for a 25 square foot basin size, and less and less willing to give that exception. They've wanted a much larger basin now for a while. And this just to note that there are much larger complications than our intent and how we're able to navigate those based on the funding that we receive. But this council has been working on getting more funding for
the benefit of the public. What Jesus is referring to are the state grants for tree planting that come through Cal Fire Department, Forestry and Fire Protection, they come with a minimum basin requirements. And we have no control over that. In fact, thanks to Jesus and FUF and our advocacy, Cal Fire has granted us an exemption, San Francisco, an exception to be able to use a smaller basin size than Cal Fire requires. But otherwise, they will simply deny the funds. They will look at the basin size and say, no, this is ineligible. That's that. There's nothing we have no say over that. So this is what I mentioned. And I think what you're seeing come out here in this discussion is the complexity of trying to navigate external funding, which is what most funding is for tree planting in San Francisco. It is not generated locally. It comes from somewhere else. Navigating those requirements with physical situation, with then all of the other requirements that are placed on that space physically. And this is what Ilaria was mentioning about street design. So we do need a lot of new thinking. I am, I guess, trying to temper, if that's the right word, expectations of how much we can do and how quickly. That's why I was trying to steer us towards things that would make a visible difference in these neighborhoods in the short term. Understanding that anybody who plants trees in San Francisco is working under a whole bunch of constraints. I don't need to tell the tree planters on the council that. I did have a quick question about the actual Public Works Order. So I think there are two things here that are both true. One is the order contains exceptions, right? And those are occasionally granted. The second thing that's also true is that the first part of that order prohibits tree planting in these narrow sidewalks. If that disappeared, that first part of the sentence disappeared, would it substantially change, or to what extent would it change the situation? Now, I don't know, and maybe members of the public will provide some insight here. But I'm wondering what the council's general feel here is. That there is that first part of the sentence says don't. So perhaps it would be worth considering removing that first part of the sentence.
Igor, thanks for asking that, and Jesus for your comments. Going back to, and I hope I'm not misunderstanding the question, but if we change that order, what would it achieve? I'm afraid that the order is based off of the realities of not having enough soil volume for tree planting, which Tanner could speak on behalf of CAL FIRE, but if I had to take a stab at why they have a standard, it's because they go back to the tree plantings because they do inspect things and they say, what does this project look like we planted 10 years ago? And they see if the trees are alive or not. And they've funded tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of tree plantings, and they can see that not giving the tree enough soil volume doesn't achieve the objective. We think that like A plus B equals C, but the formula is much more complex than that. You have all the X factors of what does it take for this tree to survive, plus the very harsh environmental conditions and site condition limitations. So if we were to say, okay, all we need is 1 foot for tree planting, we can plant everywhere, or 2 feet. It doesn't change the fact that that runs against the realities of the tree's basic needs being met.
Okay, I got you, and I agree with you. So again, for the benefit of the public, in my career, I have actually advocated to CAL FIRE to relax the standards or to allow exceptions, because it was early on, it was obvious that some of the densest cities are going to be impacted. This was 15 years ago now. Well, 13 years ago now, when the cap and trade funding first became available. It was very clear that some of the densest cities are going to be impacted by the worst by these requirements. So we knew that even back then. But yes, there is a biological reality that we're sort of working against here. But I'm still wondering, okay, the thing says don't in places under 7.6 feet. What if we just get rid of that? That still means, well, you still have to assess the site. If the site has underground utilities, if it doesn't have above ground space, if it's just not plantable, it's not plantable. but it removes this presumption that it's unplantable. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. You still run up against biological realities, access requirements, all of those things. And the answer, that's why I'm trying to kind of get a sense of, okay, does it change things? The result might be exactly the same or not. That we've heard from Sean that there is a built-in problem where if nobody advocates, then the answer is no. And I'm sort of wondering, okay, maybe that is worth looking at.
I don't want to recommend for changing the order as it's written. I think that it's fair for the general population of San Francisco's sidewalks and streets. It's hard in the bell curve of statistics, there's outliers. And it's hard to make a policy for every single outlier without miscommunicating it to the general public, to the middle of it. So if we were to say, there's no minimum standard. Well, someone with a 10-foot wide sidewalk might say, great, I'm going to make a 2-foot wide tree bed. And because we fail to set an expectation or an objective of maximizing available soil volume. So rather than like a war of attrition over how many inches are in this policy, I like the recommendation of thinking creatively about our streetscapes, because on Tehama and 5th Street, where I drove to when I accidentally thought the meeting was at the different intersection, I on my drive through Tehama, I noticed, oh, there's bulb outs on this part of the street. Now a bulb out is changing the curb. I love the hearing snaps. Makes me happy. So I'm on the right track. Bulb out makes the curb go into the street a little bit, and it's kind of a smooth slope. Now that is not typically underneath the purview of my bureau specifically, so I don't want to speak on another bureau's behalf who designs that or maintains it, because with every change in the streetscape, we have to consider how street sweeping is handled, how garbage pickups are handled, how pedestrian safety is considered. But that would be an example of there's precedent for it, and it serves, rather than trying to negotiate how this policy is written, which is meant for the general population of sidewalks and street trees. Is there a way to add? And another design consideration is using a bulb out, which would be, or another means to expand the soil volume when the sidewalk is limited. I would be interested in exploring that, but again, it goes outside of my direct influence.
Can I chime in on this for a second? First, I just want to say, because I've been waiting to say it for a long time, that I think the first question that was posed in this discussion was, what can we do to make a visible difference? Sean mentioned that there's 136 empty tree wells in SoMa, and I would maybe just suggest that we plant those, or someone plants those. I think if we're not going to take care of like the stuff that's easy to take care of, I think it could erode the public faith in trying to solve these larger problems. So I would start there, and then, okay, maybe it's only 120 tree wells, or maybe it's actually 150. I think those are minor details that won't pose huge hurdles. To answer your question about kind of like the bulb outs and like just like the terminology of the code and what's restrictive, I'm just thinking, I'm Lucas coming from the port. Like China Basin Park, I walk through there most days. I've noticed, I'm not sure if anybody else has walked through there, but there's this really nice elevated area that's in the concrete. It's a huge walkway. The trees are actually planted below the grade, and they have these big circular iron grates above them. So maybe that's an option for these higher density areas where you can still maintain your 4 feet or whatever ADA access, but instead of like burying the trees too deep or too high, maybe we can just have a soil grade that's possibly below sidewalk grade and then still meets the requirements of soil volumes for healthy trees. So I think there are like alternatives to explore than just like, okay, you have a 7-foot rectangle. How do you get, 3 feet and 4 feet on one side? And so maybe looking at some of the things that other city departments have done successfully could be a good orientation for how to solve this problem.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to miss the moment because otherwise we move on something else. So as I was mentioning, I'm an urban designer. I've been thinking about street design for many years and struggling to get more trees on the ground outside the rectangle that you're talking about. So I don't think it's today the time to come up with all the design solutions, because there is a wealth of design solutions that we can start talking about, and my department alone has a huge amount of designs in the drawer that we have not been able to implement in the city because of regulations and way things work right now. So I would just suggest that, if the council is interested in designs, we can bring a lot of designs, and the designs are very innovative for San Francisco and very standard for most cities across the world. So we can do that. But I would like to still pause on the statement that probably it's not worth changing the order, because the order is fair. I mean, I agree. I don't want to create trouble. I know that you guys have, we are working together, so it's an interagency collaboration here. But I'm just wondering if it would be better just considering and talking to Public Works a little bit further, you and also your colleagues, to ways that can be more inclusive in the order, perhaps amending some of the language to see how we can deliver the trees that we need to deliver on the streets that are different than the regular, classic 2-lane street with a 10-foot sidewalk. So one way to do it could be, again, not just looking at the width and say yes or no, because we know that most of the staff that works on these things doesn't have time to go and analyze and think about all the possible design in the world per case by case. It's too much work. So the way streamlining works is like, you look at the data, you have a rule, you apply the rule, doesn't fit, move on. And that's the problem, that all these alleyways don't fit the rules. So that's a point of that presentation. So how can we incorporate the possibility of redesigning this kind of streets, or maybe talk to the Tenderloin streets and say, well, you can plant in the ground, in the sidewalk. Maybe we can give you big containers with trees. It's better than not having anything there, right? So because otherwise it's like either you can get it or not, and it's yes or no question. I don't think we can work on yes or no questions right now. We have to kind of step out and think about creatively. So I would still ask if we can creatively think about this order in a way that doesn't eliminate the order, but amends it with language that it's really more nuanced and inclusive of some street standards, street types. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Jesus, let's have Jesus, if anybody else has a comment, because I see we're losing the public, so we need to open it up for public comment. Jesus.
Yeah, so just a couple notes that specifically Tehama and a few other streets around there seem to have been a part of a redevelopment project that OCII took on. So potentially, and then I think maybe implemented by DPW after OCII made those project plans. So potentially we could have OCII come talk about that redevelopment, that process, and how we might bring that back, not only there, but in other places. But also just in line with actions that this council has taken in the past in like helping define processes. Maybe it's not removing that 7.5 foot minimum, but helping figure out a more transparent process for the exception, how the exception happens, just because that's kind of how this council has taken on landmark trees and other trees on major development projects, stuff like that. So just in line with that kind of history. But that's all my only notes.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I think the idea of saying where we want the 7.5 foot idea, because it is actually a reasonable idea. However, we shouldn't use that to exclude planting on its own. It's more like, no, we evaluated it. Oh, it doesn't meet the 7 foot rule, but it also doesn't meet the soil volume or something. There is a way to do this where we're retaining the spirit of the idea, saying, yeah, no, we recognize trees have these space needs, but we don't want to use that to then essentially preclude planting in certain areas. Where we apply the 7.5-foot rule, we need to then document what it is where it is that specific space fails the plantability idea. Anyway, I'm going to shut up as I promised. Does anybody else have a comment
Say
before we open it to the public?
Something really
Yeah,
quick.
go.
One part of Sean's paper in the appendix was the list of recommended species for alleyways. And I do think that when exceptions are granted, oftentimes a particular species palette is recommended. And maybe that could be part of a streamlining of exceptions process, is having a very specific list of trees that we know might do better with less soil volume, that are not going to cause sidewalk issues down the road. So that's just one thing I'll share.
Okay, so if we're throwing out other ideas, I would like to throw out the idea of, so we are reforming and reviewing the Better Streets Plan, which was issued in 2012 by the city, where it talks about design and street typologies. And I'm a big advocate of redesigning the alleyway design for that Better Streets Plan. And that requires the interagency collaboration with Public Works and other agencies to look at design standards for alleyways. It's not the solution to all the inequity in the city, but it is a practical start that will allow then alleyways to be planted. But we need to redesign. So that's a tool that it's active and it's been reviewed now by my colleagues. So I can bring it back to them and talk about this conversation.
Go.
We can offer to come back to this if the council or the public wants a presentation on our methodology for the grants. The person who wrote the grant was John Sway. He must have gone to another meeting. He's also one of the leading authors of the Urban Forest Plan, but he would be more than happy to, for transparency's sake, show the process and methodology that goes into applying for grant funding.
Yeah, great, thank you. And we may do that because, again, there is public interest, and I think there's multiple issues here that kind of come together in an unfortunate way. And I think it may be worth addressing each piece, but I would like to turn it over to the public comment. We will come back to this. Let's hear from the public.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
All right, good morning, council members. My name is Zachary and I work with the South of Market Community Action Network, or SOMCAN. For over 2 decades, SOMCAN has been advocating and organizing Filipino families, seniors, tenants, and workers that live in and work in the South of Market. So as has already been stated in the presentation, the lack of tree canopy in SoMa is a huge public health crisis, and our community is at the center. SoMa has a tree canopy of just 2.7%, a fraction of the city's 12.8% average. And this is not just an aesthetic preference, it's a severe health inequity. So in 2022, with funding from the Bay Area Air District's James Carey Smith grant, SOMCAN conducted a community health study with SoMa residents on traffic congestion and air quality in the South of Market. We compiled our findings in our 2023 report, Urban Air Pollution Impacts on Health, Wellness, and Safety, and the report details how our community lives in a state of extreme environmental burden. SoMa is, of course, a designated environmental justice community with one of the city's highest pollution burdens. Residents of SoMa are exposed to substantial air pollution due to its proximity to Interstate 80, Interstate 280, and Highway 101. According to DPH in 2020, SoMa had the highest yearly average particulate matter concentrations out of any neighborhood in San Francisco. So many of our families live in the alleyways that will eventually experience tree removal. Many of these alleyways are also included in the SoMa Youth and Family Special Use District, which was created in 2008 to protect and enhance the health and environment of youth and families. And despite this, District 6 continues to have the least amount of green space per capita of any neighborhood in the city, and now is at risk of losing most of its trees. Respondents to our survey commented that the presence of more urban gardens and trees in the neighborhood would not only provide places of respite and shade for residents, but would also cultivate a sense of stewardship among residents and forge stronger community ties. So for our youth, families, and seniors, trees are not just a luxury, but essential public health and community infrastructure. SoMcan joins a growing citywide coalition, including the SoMa West Neighborhood Association, Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, and the UCSF Center for Climate Health and Equity to advocate for the following. We endorse the findings of the Concrete Over Canopy report. We demand the immediate repeal or amendment of Public Works Order 1872-46, and we demand the passage of a San Francisco tree equity ordinance that legally mandates the city to close the canopy gap in SoMa and other EJ communities. Our community has borne the brunt of the city's environmental burdens for decades. We urge the council to advocate for creative solutions that will address the environmental inequities our community faces. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment.
Good morning, Tom Radulovich with Livable City. We really appreciate all the work that Sean has gone to. We definitely support all of his requests for you today, and we would urge you to act on them. Just a few observations. If you say, okay, well, there's a standard, right, and it says it recommends against, but you can get an exception. But if there's no clear path for that exception, right, if it's not clear how to request that thing, and that the department's always going to argue resources and, well, I don't know, this is a lot harder and it probably won't survive and this and that, then it's theoretically possible, but it becomes a de facto no. So I think that, and this is what people are running up against, right? It's not clear. You need something pushing on the other direction, that yes, it's more difficult, it requires individual look, there might require a technical solution, but we're going to make sure that we put that extra effort into neighborhoods for some reason. And I think that reason would be equity, right? So you need a standard. We don't have standards at the neighborhood level. We've been really promoting this idea of the 330-300 standard. It's by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. It's considered a best practice standard for cities. The 3 is everyone should have 3 trees visible from their home, either out the front windows or back windows, hopefully windows in your own. The 30 is 30% green canopy cover, and the 300 is no one should be more than 300 meters, about 1,000 feet, from a green park you can walk into, right? You should be able to walk into a green park, be surrounded by trees. So we don't have anything like that. So I think you need standards, and that's one of the things you've been asked to do today. And that would push back against the no, right, that often comes. And neighborhoods can get exceptions. I mean, I live right off of Guerrero Street. It's like you've got all these trees in a 2-foot median. Someone got an exception. I know who did. She was politically connected. But that shouldn't be the way that you get trees in your neighborhood. You know who to ask. You're politically connected, right? It should be a process. We should be moving towards equity. And just a general observation on SoMa, worked there for 20 years, was on the Western SoMa Task Force. Decades ago, the city traffic engineers turned most streets in SoMa into big car sewers. What that has meant is, and we know this from Donald Oppiard's research, Livable Streets, when you have too much traffic, people kind of, they cease caring about the public right of way, drives them away, drives people into their homes, breaks down the social bonds in a community. Then, if you say to those same communities, well, yeah, you've been victimized by, bad traffic engineering, but we don't think that you, are going to take care of the stuff that we plant, you perpetuate that inequity. So what you need to do is invest more in creating better streetscapes in the worst neighborhoods, SoMa Tenderloin, worst in terms of streetscape. And if you do that, then we might lift folks up out of this cycle. Otherwise, disinvestment creates apathy, and it'll just keep going forever. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment.
Good morning, council members. My name is Teresa Dolalas. I'm in SoMcan and I live in the SoMa Pilipinas District 6. I'm here to speak for our community's urgent need for trees. In SoMa, trees are not just landscaping. They are life-saving infrastructure for us. They clean our air, provide shade during dangerous heat waves, reduce energy costs, manage stormwater, and support both physical and mental health. Believe me. For a neighborhood like ours with so little green space and some of the worst air quality, trees mean survival to us. District 6 is surrounded by The 101, 280, and 80 freeways, the cars, trucks, and constant traffic mean we breathe pollution every single day. Inside our homes, many families, include mine, still use gas appliances that emit toxic fumes. That means pollution doesn't stop at our doorstep. Pollution is everywhere, inside and out. In this reality, trees are not just nice to have. They are not optional. They are our filters, our shade, our protection. San Francisco, yes, made promises. The urban forest plan calls for 30,000 new trees by 2040. The 3,500 trees project backed by $12 million in federal funding was meant to prioritize environmental justice communities like SoMa, SoMa West, Tenderloin, the Bayview, and the Mission. That funding must truly reach us. And yes, I know there are planned plantings as part of the Folsom and Howard Streetscape projects, and I know you all know that. And while that is important, it only addresses the main corridors. The alleyways and residential streets where families live remain bare, exposed, and overheated. Planting only on big streets is not enough. Equity means trees must grow where people actually live, breathe, walk, and play every day. But here is the contradiction. If we have plans to expand the canopy, but why are trees still being removed? Why are storm-fallen trees sometimes not replaced? You know, we have the highest incidence of TB, tuberculosis, in District 6. I just want to let you guys know that. Why are new trees being planted in neighborhoods that already have canopy, while SoMa and environmental justice communities stay behind and remain bare? This neglect creates mistrust among us. We cannot continue treating trees on an exception basis, but I like your idea.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is 3 minutes of public comment.
And I just, the last, I would really
Sure.
appreciate it. We ask that please you survey and fill the tree basins, including alleyways, prioritize planting where residents face the greatest pollution and heat risks, ensuring that promised federal and city funding is truly directed to SoMa and other environmental justice communities, not diverted elsewhere, and that funding accounts not only for planting, but long-term care and maintenance. They involve residents in deciding which species, where they're planted, and how they're cared for. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your comment. And I just want to note, I don't want to like unjustly cut anyone off. It's just so make sure that everyone gets their amount of time, 3 minutes, please. The timer is on the monitor in front of you, so please just try to pay attention.
Thank you for letting us come here and express our opinions. I live in West SoMa. My name is Nikhil. I've been a resident here in West SoMa for about 5 years. Over the 5 years, I've seen many of the trees fall over because of those heavy winds, rains, and as it has been noted before, those tree wells have been empty. I always wondered if I could just go and plant trees. Besides everything that a lot of folks have mentioned today, all very valid points. I support having those empty wells filled first in any way possible. And the only addition to that is that not all trees are the same, right? Some of them could thrive in smaller tree bells. So I have a monstera inside my house that's 13 feet tall. Not that a monstera would survive on the road, but I'm sure arborists among us would know of trees that will survive in smaller tree bells. But that's it. Just wanted to be here and offer my support to my neighbors, and hopefully the tree bells get filled up. Yield my time to the next person.
Great. Thank you for your comment.
Hello, members of the council. Thank you for hearing us today. My name is Daniel Dakota. I've lived in SoMa now 25 years. I've seen kind of the change in things in the last 25 years. Kind of the one consistent thing that I've seen is the drop in Department of Public Works interactions with us in terms of to the point where we've had to create our own community benefit district to aid in trash removal. And now it seems like we'll be aiding in, if we're able to get these trees, aiding in the watering and the maintenance of that. We were discussing kind of the equality approach to how the trees are going. But if you kind of looked at some of the maps that Sean showed, like, there's 10 different districts that are well below the current average. So I would kind of look at that and figure out how we can potentially equal the playing field and kind of bring everyone up to that 12%. So that could be, preventing funds from going to some of these areas that have, well above 20% of coverage. Other solutions I think could be good would be, above ground planter boxes where we don't need to dig in, we don't need to go into the concrete to do those things. If the trees are showing any forms of distress or any kind of thing, we could potentially move them to a different location on the street so that we're not just locked into these kinds of situations. So I'm yield my time. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you for your time.
I'm Brendan Tobin. I've lived in SoMa for over a decade, and I'd like to echo all the previous speakers' comments. I've heard a lot of very detailed scientific explanations about tree well sizes and soil volumes and things like that, as well as like complex things about funding requirements and bureaucracy and approval processes and requirements. But that does not reflect the reality I've experienced on the ground trying to plant trees in SoMa and trying to make my community nicer. I have personally used political connections to get exceptions and help neighbors plant trees in SoMa before. And within 6 months, DPW and city departments had come by and ticketed those and threatened them for removal. At that same time, I understand that the FBI was investigating and sentencing the director of DPW for long-running corrupt behavior. Like, I understand there are fundraising or there are funding restrictions. It doesn't seem like those worked in a variety of cases. I also lived several blocks from the Parks Department's new headquarters, and I watched them spend a city grant renovating their headquarters to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars right in the middle of SoMa. I tried to engage with them about planting some other trees very close to that very fancy office. And I got nothing but scientific explanations about why that would not be possible. As I understand it, there's a large corruption investigation about the Parks Alliance right now. And the director of the Parks Department has just resigned. And effectively, the Parks Alliance has stolen the savings from hundreds of community groups, including community gardens and other local nonprofits. Lastly, I've tried to work with Friends of the Urban Forest, and I've paid them for trees before, and they charged $800 a tree for something that's shorter than me and has less than a 1-inch trunk. I can go to Home Depot and buy that same tree for 1/10 of the price, but I'm not allowed to. If I did that, someone would come by and ticket my tree and threaten it for removal and tell me I need bureaucratic exceptions to deal with science. Please stop just using scientific explanations to tell us why it's impossible to have trees in SoMa. SoMa has a lot of really nice, beautiful, tall trees that have been paid for and planted by private businesses, private developments, etc. If you want an example, look at the 3M project that was recently completed in under 2 years ago. It has beautiful 20-foot tall trees outside of it that are all thriving and growing. Please stop using science to make up excuses for not planting trees and just do what is already working in SoMa.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Abigail Crock. I'm a public health professional and I'm a resident of SoMa. There's many things that were said today that I think are food for thought. And one of those is what I would ask this council is, do we have a right to tree cover? Because we don't have it. And do we have it because we won't take care of it? I don't believe that. I feel like we have a fundamental right to have equal access to nature, to health. We're already in a space where we have higher pollution because of the freeways. I'm a public health professional. I live less than 500 feet from a freeway. I know what that means. But without any trees, we have none of the mitigation that we need. And so when you say that we're not planting them because people won't take care of them because it's not their basic need, I would argue with you that trees are a basic need, and that when you live in an urban heat island, you need trees to produce canopy. And people, just because they don't have enough food to eat, doesn't mean that they shouldn't have tree canopy. So that's number one. And number two, not everybody that lives in SoMa doesn't have their basic needs met. So that argument is not sound. Like, we're professionals. And this is the neighborhood that's going to continue to grow. When you say it's not fair for developers to have a setback, why not? Why can't we design the environment so people can live there comfortably? It's the cheapest neighborhood to live in right now. The city wants workers to come back. Where are they going to live? So you're going to say people need to come to this neighborhood. Everybody has to be in the office 5 days a week. But to be able to walk to work, you have to agree to live in a neighborhood that is underdeveloped and underserved. And so is the point of this council to continue the inequities that we've experienced for all the reasons that you stated today? Or are we going to keep doing the same thing and getting the same result? That's all.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Lance Carnes. I was taught about city trees by Mr. Josh Clipp here about 5 years ago, and I began investigating, tree plants. In fact, I went to LA, who just started their tree plan, which was very successful. Anyway, one of the things they embarked on was, you were talking about Bayview and how to get trees planted there. LA identified East LA as being a place with hotspots eventually, and they wanted to put trees in there. So they collaborated with USC, came up with a plan to plant trees in that hotspot area. So that's something we could possibly do if we have lots of universities in San Francisco. And I think you're a PhD dendrologist or something. So. The next thing is tree mortality, and I appreciated your comments about soil condition, which I've never been able to evaluate, but I have been able to evaluate watering. And I'm in District 3. They planted, how much do I have? A slew of trees, maybe 75 trees. I went around and checked the watering on these trees. They didn't water some weeks. In fact, some trees just wilted away and died. Even though I contacted DPW and said, you got to water these trees, they did not. So soil condition, I'm sure, is very important, and watering is very important as well. And so let's see. There was also there was a project called the Guerrero Median, I think it was called, where they planted trees and little succulents and things along there. I went in part of my watering checkups. I checked that median. It was never watered. So all the little trees died and all the little succulents died, and it was a desert. But there was one block that was maintained by a resident, which they used as a model for the whole thing, and that was still looking pretty good. Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to say is that I've tried to use the Public Works database of trees. It's pretty shabby, and people go in and change stuff just on their own. It's open to the employees. I would suggest doing a new inventory. There's a company called Davy that has they'll make you a database of all the trees in your city, and it's public facing. So anybody can go in and look and see what tree is there, what's the watering schedule, this and that. And if you ever go to the one in LA, it's enormous, and you have to wait a while for it to load. Anyway, those are some of my comments, just based on my personal experience. I'm a mathematician, but not as good as Sean. He did an amazing job.
That's
So-
the 3 minutes, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good morning, almost afternoon. I appreciate everybody's time. My name is Jasmine Gardner, and despite my name, I am not a botanist or an arborist or an expert in any of that. So I won't be touching on that. But one of the things that I do quite vividly is advocate. So I'm a court-appointed special advocate for the foster system. I also advocate for elders and my lovely SoMa at West as well. And so when we talk about advocacy, which is kind of what we're talking about when we say case-by-case basis, it's obviously for everyone in this room just comes second nature, right? But it is such a privilege to have the time and money to advocate for something. And that's why with no equity plan and no change to Ordinance 187246, the advocacy for SoMa, it's not going to be there. And that's for a million reasons. One is socioeconomic levels. One is we have a really interesting nuanced balance of residential and commercial on every street from just how SoMa exists. And all these topics have already been touched on, and I understand that. But I really do want to drive home that the diversity of SoMa, which is what makes us great, also kind of makes for a really difficult advocacy. So just an example, the case-by-case basis, just to have this kind of tree pilot program that we launched, which was fabulous. And I'm so happy and helpful for the DPW to do this. But it basically took 4 years of Sean's time, a lot of money. And then it took, tons of us coming out, going on a tree tour with David, who SoMa West would love to adopt. Your passion for San Francisco's beautification is what we need. But that's a lot of work. I took time out on a Monday. I spent all morning here, and I'm really lucky. I'm a business owner. I can do that. But even the people that could do that couldn't stay the whole time to make their comments. So I really want us to keep in mind, as we're thinking about where appropriate changes are in legislation, that advocacy and the ability to do that is not available to everyone. And that's literally what we're seeing when we're looking at these areas. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for comment.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Osgood with the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, also the Rincon Point Neighbors Association. I've lived in SoMa for 35 years. Just kind of here to associate with our letter on page 15. CSFN represents neighborhood groups citywide. And basically, we support the proposals and solutions that Sean has put forward. Before you go out of business, you might want to have one last success story and implement some of these solutions. I endorse what everybody said about simple. There's too much talk about inches here, water, that sort of thing. In my 35 years in SoMa, kind of Eastern SoMa, I don't think I've ever seen a tree die and be removed. I mean, they seem to manage on their own. So, let's not be overanalyzing all of this. The biggest problem is the city killing trees, especially in our neighborhood, massacring trees. We just this month lost 10 trees at the corner of Mission and Spear for no good reason. Now, I appealed that, so I know it in detail. There was no good reason for those trees to be removed. Buff rubber stamped it. There was no engineer's report. They just said, oh, we have a particular kind of waterproofing system we want to use. No engineer endorsement. Buff rubber stamped that. No questions. Just, okay, remove the 10 trees. What the hey? we lost 14 trees at the corner of Howard and Stewart. Again, no good reason for it. So that's a good thing as you get into your new endeavors, pass that message on. So keep it simple and thank you.
Thank you for a comment.
Hi there, Jason Bernier, 20-year resident and property owner in SoMa. I just wanted to share a story. I bought a $14 daisy the other day, plant, and I put it on my balcony. And for the first time, I saw a hummingbird come by. And then maybe more importantly, the neighbor across the street. I've been living on this block for almost a year. She said, "I love your flower." And that was kind of the first interaction we had. So what could a tree do? Think about it.
Great. Thank you for a comment. Anyone else? It is indeed heartening to see so many people, to see everyone's passion about trees, and to see this level of appreciation for, especially for street trees in some of our most difficult conditions.
All right. Seeing no further members of the public who wish to comment on this item, public comment on this item is now closed.
Okay. So I think the minimum that we're going to do here is look at that public order.
Sorry. What's that? Yeah.
We have a whole bunch of written comments.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. I do want to note that we have north of 20 comments and at least 4 letters that make up the first 20-something pages of the packets today in support of the presentation we received today and echoing the conversation that the public commenters today have brought forward. I also want to note that all of this will be uploaded to the Urban Forestry Council website, that the Concrete Over Canopy document was also reprinted in this packet, and that all the folks that signed in today will also be added to the Urban Forestry Council mailing list so that everyone has the opportunity to keep apprised of what further discussion on this topic continues.
Great. So I think what we're going to do, and we can have a further discussion about this, is there's 3 things here that I can see. One is the Public Works Order. So I think it's worth having a discussion about this, to what extent the default no creates a problem or creates a barrier. And I think an amendment that doesn't negate the biological reality, although I was struck with this idea, stop with the scientific explanations for why trees are not possible. Yeah, that was a comment that hit close to home. But I think we do need to look at this and see how we can accommodate both the physical reality and a process that doesn't create an automatic barrier. So that's one thing. The tree equity ordinance, I think, is a longer discussion. There are several pieces to this, and the funding piece is not insignificant. And so I would say let's have a further discussion on that. But I think one thing we didn't, and I think maybe Laria, this is where you come in, this issue of design standards and low-hanging fruit. Where is it that we can actually, is it those 136 empty tree wells? How can we get some visible change on the ground that signals to the SoMa neighborhood that things are getting better.
Well, I can definitely help with connecting the conversation between the EJ framework at planning and the design standards. My colleagues, urban designers, are starting to work on the Better Streets plan, and I think we can be convener of a larger conversation about these design standards for the SoMa area. And also I've been pushing for the Tenderloin to put trees in containers. And I had very good conversations with Buff about it.
Yeah, I think that's the longer term conversation. I'm looking for a shorter term. Where are trees going in so that, year, 2 years from now, we have sort of numbers and we can show, okay, this is the change that's been made.
Yeah, and also when development comes up, where having trees in the plans, because sometimes we're told that we can't put trees on the streets.
Okay, great. So we'll work with Jesus to move these ideas forward, and we'll work with David to see where opportunities exist. I think
Let's do that.
Terrific. Thank you all. Really appreciate everyone's input. And again, this is very encouraging. All right, Jesus, next item, please.